To the uninitiated, DMing might seem like an easy thing. After all, we're just playing a board game, right? Wrong. In actuality, DMing is a curious blend of rules knowledge, world building, improvisation, acting, and communication that blends in a little bit from all three of the sciences and could benefit from a psychology degree and probably therapy, not to mention every life experience you've ever gone through. In short, it's a lot. But there are two traits that might be more important than all other traits when it comes to being the best DM you can be, and there are ways to improve them. The first of these traits is an understanding and feel for pacing. To paraphrase Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft's entry on paraphrasing, which, while admittedly aimed towards the horror genre, is pretty applicable to all tabletop role-playing games. Pacing is the speed and energy with which your story unfolds. This relates to the amount of action in your game and the tension or frequency of suspenseful moments. Everything can't be tense, and continuous terror is unsustainable. Before players grow numb to endless tension, create opportunities for them to catch their breath and regain a temporary feeling of calm. The best adventures are like roller coasters, ratcheting up suspense and releasing it before building toward the next harrowing moment. Also, mix up social interaction, exploration, combat, and other types of encounters to create interesting and engaging pacing. Ensure that scenes are always somehow relevant to your story and move characters towards their goals. Essentially, pacing is the speed of action at your games. But, like Van Richten pointed out, we can't just have it pushing along at the highest pace we can set at all times, or else it just becomes this blur that we don't appreciate. But instead, the understanding of patience that we're talking about means learning how to change the pace in individual moments and how to recognize the pace that we're dealing with. And that's why pacing is number one when it comes to the traits you need as a good dungeon master. The number one biggest change that you can make to your games is to start paying attention to how the pace of every individual scene is going and to find ways to improvise adjustments to those paces so that the scenes that are moving particularly fast can have opportunities for slowdown. You can ratchet things up when things are quiet. You can figure out how to shift things from one to the other and roller coaster ride your adventure into something a little bit grander than it started out as. There are a number of different resources that you can turn to in order to learn about pacing, and a couple of exercises that I'll outline in a little bit. Some of the resources include a book by Robin Laws entitled Hamlet's Hit Points. This book not only categorizes the different ways that video media adjusts pacing, but then takes that a step further by taking a look at Casablanca, Dr. No, and Hamlet, and pulling apart each scene and identifying the different types of pace change that are taking place and whether there are increases or decreases. It can get into the nitty-gritty and is really worth a read in order to be able to understand pacing, but it can grow a little bit crazy if you try to apply it directly to your tabletop role-playing games. And what I mean by that is that you do need to realize that you are not in complete control as a dungeon master. While as a director of a movie you might be able to set each individual scene and decide on up and down beats at all times, you're working in a collaborative fashion with a group of individuals that also have some control over how the pacing of things goes. The greater your understanding of pacing and the amount of time that you spend coming up with ways to adjust can be a big benefit to your game, but trying to force things to go down the road that you have envisioned when it comes to the pacing sounds familiar because it's basically another name for railroading. There's also a number of blog posts on the topic that you can dive into in order to get a little bit more of an understanding. Some of my favorites include the ones written by Sly Flourish and The Alexandrian. Just search for their name plus pacing and you should be able to find their works. That said, I promised some exercises, and I try to deliver on promises. First up, study other media. Ask yourself when you sit down to read a book or binge Netflix what this show, movie, or book is doing in the pacing department. Look for moments when things get tense or when things calm down, and notice the change points between those especially. If you want to really get deep into this, you can keep a little notebook on hand and just make little notes of ups and downs as the tension roller coasters around. And don't worry too much if you just ask yourself the question before you start watching, and at the end of the show that you're watching, you can usually pick out a couple of interesting tidbits and you'll grow more and more aware of the pacing of what you're doing. Second, during a game, make note of what's happening during your game time whenever you notice somebody in your group reaching for their phone for a non-related task or otherwise checking out. These moments are usually not going to be happening at a moment of change in pace, but rather happen when something has gone just a tiny bit too long. Either it's continued to ramp up in tension until they need a break and are looking for it elsewhere, or it's dragged down in tension to the point where they need a fix in order to be able to get a little bit more excitement again. These moments can be perfect opportunities for you to interject a change, and so noting when they happen is a great way to get started. A third way, very similar to the first, is to pay attention to your games and make a little up or down arrow notation. Bonus points if you can add what's happening or the time when it happens. When you feel a shift of mood at your table, when the tension seems to rise in your players or seems to lay back into a more calm state. Simply by paying attention to the mood and pace at your table and in other media, you're going to increase your understanding and feel for patience, which is going to give you those opportunities to decide how and when to change them. If you're looking for things to interject in order to change the pacing and the like, then check out my video on complication tables. And make certain that as you fill out your list of complication options, that you are putting down things that both speed things up and add tension, or things that can bleed it off and allow a more calm moment. But this video isn't supposed to be all about tension, because there's a second trait that really elevates people's games as a dungeon master, and that's curiosity of outcome. I once watched somebody stream one of their shows. They were another professional dungeon master, and they were running way more games than I even believed was possible, and somehow managing to do it with largely one-shots, which blew my mind just a little bit at the time. However, I watched their stream, and the one trait that I would say that they completely and utterly lacked was excitement for their own game. They seemed incredibly bored as they tried to deliver their lines and push people through their combats, and I was wondering if this was what their game looked like at all times, because I wouldn't have wanted to play in that. But what I realized was missing wasn't actually excitement at all. What was missing was a curiosity about the outcome. This person had run the same game as a one-shot over and over and over again for so many different people that I don't think that they really cared how things turned out anymore. They weren't really curious about what the players did or what was going to happen to the story, and that just showed through into their DMing. Curiosity is incredibly important for two major reasons. The first reason is because it's the cure for railroading. There are a number of modules that have been pointed out and complained about by the community, and perhaps rightly so, as being a railroad, where the only path that is detailed in the story is the specific set and perfect path that it's intended to be accomplished in, which is somewhat understandable when you're a publisher and dealing with page counts. But it does lead to a story that if somebody deviates off it, you're running with absolutely no direction, and that can be overwhelming, especially for newer DMs. But the reason that curiosity is the cure for railroading is that if you are curious about what happens when your party veers off to the side and you try to answer those questions, you lead to a game that is no longer stuck on a linear path. You do need to create more, and so it's a lot more work on you as the DM, but being curious about how people are going to get from point A to point B when you can't predict all the different paths that could lead there is what leads to excitement in you, the DM. But not only is that curiosity a source of excitement for you, but as the second point, it's the source of excitement and tension for your game and your players as well. Being curious about how things could turn out means that you're providing an opportunity for people to engage in their own curiosity and level up their own excitement about what's going on, and then the tension of whether or not they achieve achieve their desire or are kept from it is palpable. And just like when working on your pacing, there's a number of different exercises you can take to improve your curiosity at your game. The first is reflection. There's a video floating around about reflection here somewhere, but ultimately it comes down to asking one very key question. What did I learn about X, Y, or Z? When I had the opportunity to play recently in a game run by another dungeon master, one of the things that I tried to do as a player in order to gain a better enjoyment at the table and to be more curious and develop that was ask myself what I learned about the other players' characters at the table every week. Discovering little snippets of their backstory or their personality or their proclivities was a delight for me that made it really interesting and gave me questions that I wanted to find the answers to. And it works the same way when you're DMing. Even though you have a lot of the information, and so you feel like maybe it's harder to find something that you don't know the answer to, there's so many little tidbits that you can wonder about. How your players are going to react to this situation or that. What they're going to do when placed in this circumstance or another. All having curiosity about what is going to end up happening is a great way to build the excitement at your table, both yours to learn things and theirs to enjoy the experience. The second exercise that you can undertake is to let yourself go down rabbit holes. This is often called leaning in. When your players are asking for a specific course of action, it can be easy to say, well, I don't have anything prepared in this direction, and try to steer them back onto the railroad path. But if you really want to bring excitement to your games and level up your dungeon mastery, you need to learn how to lean into those unexpected events and to roll with them anyway. It might not be your best play ever in terms of preparedness and the mastery of the circumstances, but you will find that over time, as you allow yourself to go down these rabbit holes and lean into these strange paths that your players suggest, that your DMing itself will improve, and each of those weird side paths will get better, and the opportunity for you to be prepared for them will increase as you'll start to understand what your players are interested in, and as you get better and better at running these different options. As a third exercise, get excited for surprises. By getting excited at the surprises that happen and laughing out loud when something doesn't go according to plan, making notes on it there, we increase our curiosity for how things are going to turn out in those moments. Perhaps the hardest exercise to undergo when it comes to increasing your curiosity is to let go of needing to be right. Frankly, this is a task that's pretty hard in all aspects of life, not just in Dungeon Mastery. When we desire to be right and we fight to work towards that, we naturally kill off curiosity about other paths that might exist. By letting go of being right, we allow all possibilities to be put back onto the table. And so we again further cure railroading in our games, as we no longer think of this as the right path and this as the side jaunt, but instead think of all paths as being equally correct. Whatever path your players take is the right path for their table, and as long as you can find ways to lean into that opportunity, you'll eventually find a way back to the story that you began with, or maybe you won't, and it's okay either way. As long as you guys are having fun along the ride, then everything's working out as it's intended to. In all of this, you might want a useful, actionable tool that you can put to use in order to improve your pacing and curiosity at your games. If so, then click on this link in order to pick up my after-action DM improvement tool, name pending, in order to jumpstart your improvements in your game. And in the meantime, this video should help you to work on whatever's next. Thanks for watching, and happy adventuring.